You're about to witness the absolute worst chess opening that I've ever played in a competitive chess tournament. This, everybody, is the recap of round number 4 in Reykjavik Open. I played against a German chess player called Michael Gallo, rated 1740, and I had the black pieces. So let's just go ahead and get to the game. Let's do this. So, as you can see, I had the black pieces, and my opponent started with the move d4. Amazing move. I went d5, bishop f4. He opted to go for the London. This is actually the first time that someone plays the London against me, like in a tournament, in a very long time. But I always like to counter the London with the move c5 because it's a move that's immediately countering the center. Taking on c5 is not scary for me because if they take on c5, I can just go knight c6. And I'm just threatening to go e5 with the tempo, attacking the bishop, and taking back this pawn with my bishop. b4 is also not possible here because the knight just takes it. So e3 was played, which makes a lot of sense just to protect this pawn. I went knight c6 with the same idea that if pawn takes c5, I have e5 immediately, threatening the bishop and being able to take the pawn back. Knight f3 was played. In this position, I just got my other knight out. I just want to develop all my knights before I decide where I'm going to go with my bishops. And in this position, white can sort of choose if they want to go c3 or knight b2. If c3, I would probably have played something like queen b6 and activated my queen through this file, attacking this pawn in b2. And I'm just going to show you something very quickly. The move that was played was knight bd2, but I just want to show you a trick over here in case you didn't know it. Which is that after queen b6, if they would go for queen b3, which is a very normal move just to defend this pawn in b2, there's c4, and now the good move for white is to take on b6, and then, you know, this becomes a position where your rook is kind of threatening this pawn, you have an open file, but your pawn in b6 is a bit weak. But if they would opt for going queen c2, there's this really nice tactic of bishop f5, which actually is just a really good move. So queen c1 is the best move, but then you've been able to get your pieces out very quickly and with the tempo. Because if they take on f5, you have queen takes b2, and the rook is hanging. So I just wanted to show you this trick very quickly, just in case you play this. But knight bd2 was played over here, and in this position I decided to take on d4, and the reason for that was just that I just wanted to make sure that this pawn in c5 was never hanging, and I also kind of wanted white to decide, you know, what they were going to take with, if they're going to take, because if they would have time to go with c3, maybe they could at some point take with this pawn, even though, to be honest, I don't think that they would ever want to do it because of the fact that this knight is on d2 and not c3. So they don't really want to open up the c file too much typically. But yeah, anyways, I took here, e takes d4, and I went bishop f5. And now bishop f5, I'm just developing my bishop, putting it in an active square, looking a little bit towards c2. I might be threatening at some point knight b4 if they don't really do anything about this. So in this position, my opponent went for the aggressive move, bishop b5. Bishop b5, pinning my knight. Here, I decided that this wasn't really much of a threat, so I wanted to just keep on developing. I went e6. And my opponent, super aggressive, and then went knight e5. Here I did an absolutely horrible move. You can pause the video right now if you want to try to guess what the move that I did was. So just take a little moment. Just take a little moment. Look for a move that perhaps looks a bit natural, but that is just a disaster. Okay, anyways, guys, I went for rook c8. This move, I played it pretty quickly, and the idea of it was just that I didn't want to decide where my queen was going to go yet. You know, if it was going to go to a5, b6. So I decided that I wanted to go rook c8 because I thought it was a flexible move, but I was kind of surprised. I was like, why have I never played rook c8 in the past? Because I've had this position in the past while playing blitz online. I honestly took less than 30 seconds to play this move. I just played it thinking that, you know, it was a safe and sound move. And then it hit me that after knight takes c6, b takes c6, bishop a6 just wins my exchange. My rook is trapped. If I go to the only square where it's not, you know, attacked right now, rook a8, there's bishop b7, and this is just a disaster. My rook is trapped, this pawn is hanging, complete disaster. And this was the game, everybody. And let me tell you, I was kind of scared over here. I realized how bad this was. Instead of rook c8, the very normal move is to go queen b6. Now, the reason why I didn't do it was because I didn't know what to do after c4. because I thought that rook c8 here looked kind of scary due to maybe something like queen b3. I don't know, I thought this looked a little scary. I thought that c5 seemed like a scary threat. I don't know, my queen is just not really doing that great. It felt like bishop e7, c5. If queen a5, yeah, things like this just looked really scary to me. B takes, and then queen b7, threatening my rook and my pawn. I wasn't really entirely sure what to do here. If castles, there's if castles, there's queen takes e7. It's just losing a piece for me. So that was why I decided to like not opt for queen b6. But apparently queen b6 after c4, I just need to go d takes c4, and then after if something like this, I can just take the bishop. And if they would go bishop takes c6, then I just have b takes c6, and after knight c4, I can just go something like queen a6, and I'm doing completely fine. So anyways, this is the game, guys. In this position, my opponent went for, they did this whole thing. They want my rook, but I went rook b8 because I felt that this bishop was stronger than this one. So I decided that I'd rather change this, like I'd rather sack my rook for this bishop than this one, because it felt like the b file was the only open file. So, and this bishop was basically stopping me from going to the b file. So it made sense for me to exchange the rook for this bishop and not this one. So I went rook b8, and they pretty much have to take, otherwise actually my rook is really well placed here. So takes and takes, and now I am officially an exchange down on move 11. After queen takes b8, my opponent went for the move knight f3. Now in this position, I actually had a couple threats. I mean, I was threatening queen b6, threatening the bishop, and threatening to take on d4. I was threatening maybe this pawn, not really, I think, because in this exact position, queen takes b2 would be a disaster due to rook b1, and then, you know, the rook is coming in. So he went knight f3 just to protect this pawn. And in this position, I decided to take on b2. Now, this is a pretty risky move. Probably something like bishop d6 could have been a little bit better. Just because if castles, then I can probably just go bishop e4. And I have a lot of threats here. Even if I don't exchange down, all my pieces are really active. I mean, I'm threatening right now to take on h2. And if they would go something like h3, then I can maybe go queen takes b2, because I'm going to be castling the next move. And my bishop is also stopping the rook from ever coming to b8. So this maybe could have been a better way of playing, but, you know, I just thought that this was fine, actually, and I'm going to be explaining to you why. But as you guys can also see, perhaps knight f3 wasn't the best move for my opponent. I was more afraid of a move like bishop d3, because this bishop was really badly placed over here. It made more sense to move that bishop to a better square than to move another piece, because this is already defending from the queen b6 threat. So in this position, I would probably have maybe gone for something like bishop g4, just to maybe, if f3, just to kind of open up for the king a little bit. But this definitely would have been a much more active position for white than what happened. So I think this would have been better. But anyways, they went knight f3, and I went queen takes b2. I wanted to take this pawn. The idea was that if rook b1, I had bishop b4 check. This is a really important move. And the idea here is that if knight d2 to cover, I mean, after bishop takes and king takes d2 and queen takes d4, I just thought I was better here, because they cannot take with the queen due to queen takes b1. So I thought that after this, I would be just better, because the king would be in the center, I would have one pawn for the exchange, and all my pieces would be super active. So I thought that this wasn't really good, and if after bishop b4, the king would have moved somewhere, like king f1 or something, then my plan was just to go queen a3, threatening this bishop with check, and just basically having all my pieces pretty active. Knight e4 is maybe coming, I'm going to be castling, and I thought that I perhaps had some counterplay for the exchange. So this was the idea, basically. So that's why I took on b2. But my opponent did not go rook b1. Instead, they castled, just to, you know, keep the king safe, and also to avoid bishop b4 check, of course. So in this position, I decided to go bishop d6. I think it's an important move, stopping any piece from ever checking me on b8, because, you know, there was a big threat of rook b1. If I moved my queen, there was rook b8 check, winning my rook if my bishop was not here. So it was really important for me to put my bishop in a square where I was preventing this check. As my pieces are a little bit underdeveloped, you know, my bishop wasn't out, my king needed to castle. So this is an important move, I think. And in this position, my opponent went for the move rook b1, just threatening my queen. Now here, I kind of was thinking if I wanted to take this pawn on a2. As you guys can see, there are several pawns that are hanging. But I decided that I did not want to take any of these pawns because I have an exchange down, but I basically have a rook instead of, or my opponent basically has a rook instead of a bishop. And rooks always thrive in open files. Like I always say that. The purpose of a rook is to, live on an open file. So I just thought that it would be stupid of me to open up more files when it can only benefit my opponent and not me, as I don't really have as many rooks as my opponent. I hope that makes sense. So that was the reason why I decided to not take on a2. I also thought that if queen takes a2, at some point there might be rook a1 and my pawn on a7 might be hanging. So I just thought that this wasn't so good. And I did not want to take on c2 with the queen because I didn't want to exchange queens in this position. If I exchange queens in this position, I think it's going to be really bad for me because I am an exchange down. Basically, my opponent wants to exchange as much as possible. And endgames being an exchange down are really difficult. So it's really important for me to keep my queens right now. I probably need to get back 2 pawns if I'm going to be exchanging my queens. And I need to get back 2 pawns in like a good manner. Like not 2 pawns, but then like I can lose those pawns. No, I need to like have 2 strong pawns for the exchange probably. Now you guys might also wonder in this position why I didn't go for something like bishop takes c2 over here instead of bishop d6. But something like bishop takes c2 I think would have been really bad due to queen e2, and all of my pieces are sort of pinned. I haven't castled, and I think this is actually just lost for me because if I go something like bishop d6 now, then there's just rook ac1 and I'm losing my bishop. So that was the reason for that. I just wanted to clarify before I moved on. So bishop d6, rook b1. So that is why I opted to go for queen a3 in this position instead of queen takes a2. Now here I'm threatening this bishop. I also wanted to look a little bit towards this knight. Maybe I thought that I might have some bishop e4, stuff like that. In this position, I was also really looking at this c3 square. A dream for me would be to bring my knight up. I thought that the best move for my opponent was to go bishop d3. Just trying to exchange this bishop for this one. Like I said before, my opponent wants to exchange as many pieces as possible. And this bishop on f5 is actually pretty annoying because it's, stopping this c pawn from ever pushing as the rook is here and it's looking towards the c2 pawn. So I thought this was the best move, and here maybe I would have gone something like knight e4 just to bring another piece into the attack. And here I thought that probably after something like rook b3 attacking my queen, avoiding knight c3, white was a bit better. But instead of this move, my opponent actually opted for going bishop b7, which I think is a mistake because this bishop is actually like really out of the board by being on b7. My opponent wanted to attack this pawn in c6, but I think that it's giving me a lot of tempos right now. So I went for castles here, and I was just, I was happy that I got this move for free because I thought that if bishop takes c6, I could probably go rook c8 and I could probably activate my pieces like quite a lot. And I was thinking here that if something like bishop b7, I had bishop takes c2, attacking both the queen and the rook, and here the only move pretty much is to go queen c1 to not lose the exchange. But in this position, I basically saw that I had rook c7, and I thought that this was all very interesting because the idea is that if queen takes queen, bishop takes a3. Actually now, this bishop is gonna be lost, or the exchange is gonna be lost, because the only move that the rook can, or the only place the rook can go to on this file to defend, the bishop is rook b5, but then I actually have bishop d3 winning one of these rooks. So I thought this was all really interesting, and here I'm probably winning because I am in this position at the end of the day, 1 pawn up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1. Yeah, I'm 1 pawn up. So at the end of the day, I'm a pawn up here. So if I'm able to get my exchange back, I'm doing really good. And yeah, they didn't do it. So they went queen e2. And in this position, I kind of like wanted to play a bit psychologically. I knew that the idea of queen e2 was to go queen a6. Like I could just see on my opponent how excited he was to play queen a6. So I was kind of like, I want to play a move that makes queen a6 a bad move, and at the same time I want to play a move that's useful for me. So I realized that queen a6 is actually not a threat, because if they go queen a6 now, I can actually take on c2, and one of these rooks is gonna fold. The rooks are actually trapped, and I'm gonna show you how later. So I realized that they couldn't go there, but I knew that my opponent wanted to go there. So I decided to play a useful move that also still like allowed this move. So I went h6 over here, and I'm actually really happy with this move. This is apparently the best move in the position, and I was really surprised about it because I just wasn't expecting this to actually be a good move, but this is actually a really good move, and I'm really happy with that. All of a sudden, all my pieces are really active, these pawns are weak, and this is all of a sudden really good for me. And there's also no good way for my opponent to exchange queens. My opponent, just like I predicted, went queen a6 to try to exchange the queens, but here in this position, I have bishop takes c2, which is a really important idea to have here. So the idea of this move is basically that either one of the rooks are going to get trapped or white is going to get in a pretty bad position. So my opponent went for the move rook c1. But yeah, if they take on a3 with the queen, then I just take back with my bishop. And then you can see that this rook, I mean, if rook a1, then I just basically, can just basically go knight e4. And my bishops and my knight together are just extremely strong against these rooks. This is actually really good for me. But instead, my opponent went for rook c1 here immediately. And then I continue with my idea of bishop d3. And now one of the rooks is going to get trapped. So queen takes a3. The queen pretty much needs to take over here because otherwise I'm able to take the rook. And then I just take back. I'm threatening this rook and I'm threatening this rook at the same time. So rook c3 was played to attack both of the bishops at the same time. And then I just took the rook on f1. Have to take the exchange. And here I entered an endgame where I was 2 pawns up. But I'm not going to be 2 pawns up. This pawn is going to fall, and actually this pawn is pretty weak, so I wasn't sure about how much better I was here, or if I was any better, but I do think I am a little bit better. So I went for this move, bishop b5, and I think this move is important because the idea of this was that after rook takes a7, which they pretty much have to do to like take back one of the pawns, my idea was that after rook b8, a4 is not possible here because I have bishop takes a4, and after rook takes, the bishop is hanging. So that was the idea of bishop b5, that I'm stopping white from playing a4 over here. And yeah, so this is actually what happened. I was kind of afraid if I went any other place that after it takes over here, this a pawn would push, because this a pawn is actually pretty scary. It's a pass pawn that's literally like 6 moves away from promoting, so I gotta be careful and stop that pawn. So bishop a5, rook a7, I went rook b8 just so that a4 would not be possible, and they went knight e5, which I think is a good move. And here I decided that I need to play actively, so I went knight e4 with the threats of going maybe knight d6, maybe knight c3, knight e2. And here I was afraid of knight d7. I was actually a little bit afraid of this. Rook d8. For some reason, I was a bit afraid of knight b6 because I saw that they would be able to start pushing this pawn. And during the game, I was pretty scared of that. I was thinking knight c3. I was thinking what would happen if a4, knight e2 check, bishop d3. And, in my head, this was a bit unclear during the game. But apparently, this is just good for me. Apparently, these pieces are too tied up, and it's gonna take a while for this pawn to promote. But yeah, I was definitely afraid of something like this. But this is actually fine. But instead of this, my opponent went for f3, and I decided to go for knight c3 to threaten a little bit this pawn. I'm kind of threatening to take here and then taking over there, and also to threaten this check. So here, I think my opponent made a pretty big mistake, which was that they took on c6. I think it would be important for them to either go king f2, although then I was planning on taking on a2, which, for me just felt really good because I was really afraid of this pawn. But this is actually kind of complicated because there's actually knight takes f7, and this is like pretty unclear because there is this whole pin situation going on here. So after king takes f7, there's actually bishop takes c6 check, king f6, and I mean, this is actually like super crazy, but there's takes, and takes. And now I'm actually in an endgame where it's equal pawns, and this is probably a draw. I'm a little bit better because this pawn is weaker than like my pawns because this is an isolated pawn, but still, this should probably be a draw. So, yeah, there were all of these sorts of things. Maybe king f2 was here the best move just to avoid knight e2 check, losing this pawn. And here, actually, guys, I was calculating a crazy line, which I'm so happy that I didn't go into. After knight d7, I was actually calculating c5, which honestly is the biggest disaster in the whole universe. I was just thinking that if knight takes b8, I thought I might have c takes d4, and for some reason I thought that this pawn was able to promote, which obviously it doesn't have time for because of king f5. The king is in time for this, but I think I like calculated a mix of the king being on a1 and me doing this, so I'm so happy that this didn't happen. I don't think I would have played it, but I was calculating that during the game. Anyways, bishop takes c6 was played, and I think this is a mistake because after takes and takes, my rook becomes super active and I'm just gonna be a pawn up in an endgame. So I went rook b1 check, king f2, I went rook b2 check. I'm just trying to take this a2 pawn, but actually in this position my opponent went king g3, and I know that there's a lot of mating nats with the king on g3. I was already seeing a checkmate with the knight on f4, pawn on g5, and rook takes g2 checkmate. So this felt like there were a lot of mating nets over here. If the king would have gone like to the first file, I would probably have taken this pawn and just played the endgame being one pawn up. But in this position, I had like 10 minutes, he had like 5 minutes. I decided to go for the tactical knight e2 check, and I actually think this is good because the king can't really escape this. King g4 was played, and I went f5 check. And here, I mean, where does the king go, if king h3 or king h4, I'm gonna go knight f4. It doesn't matter. And yeah, he went for king h4, and I went knight f4 just to stop the king from going either to h3 or h5. And here I'm just threatening to go g5 check, king g3, and rook g2 checkmate. So in this position, I thought that the best way for white to try to avoid this was to go rook a8, king h7, rook a7, just to stop me from going g5. But then I just thought this had to be really good after something like rook takes g2. But yeah, I thought that this was the best way for white to avoid the immediate checkmate. But instead in this position, my opponent went king g3, I went g5, and now this is just going to be a checkmate. Because there's no perpetual. I mean, if rook check, my king will always go to f6. And my opponent opted for knight e7, king f8, but there's, they sacrifice their knight over here to delay the checkmate. But yeah, there's not really any good way of stopping this. I mean, this is super winning. They went h3 over here, knight f4, and I think they just wanted the game to be over, and at the same time give me the possibility of checkmating. So they went h4. And in this position, there's just rook takes g2, and that is a checkmate. And I'm not sure if that they did this because I actually told them before the game that I was gonna do a recap of this video. I don't know if they played h4 for content or not, but anyways, I told him that because he was like sort of asking about how streaming is and stuff, so we were talking about that. So I don't know if that was the reason, but yeah, people, this was my round 4. This was my game against Michael Gallo. Guys, I was so scared. I really thought I was gonna lose after this first opening, but there were literally 2 rooks that got trapped in this game, which is crazy, which is absolutely crazy. So I hope that you guys enjoyed this recap, and I'm uploading recaps for every single round, so don't forget to check those out as well. And I also have my previous games recaps on uploaded as well, so check those out if you want to see how I've played my other games. Thank you everybody so much for watching. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and also subscribe if you enjoy the content in this channel, and I'll see you all after the recap of round 5. Goodbye, people. Bye bye. Have an awesome day.